I will teach you how to play the accelerated Sicilian dragon. And I will teach you this opening with 3 simple steps. So we are going to take a look at 3 different variations. So of course the Sicilian starts off with pawn to c5 after our opponent plays pawn to e4. And this is a very interesting opening if you are looking for a new weapon to use against pawn to e4. So most of the time white is going to play knight to f3, which is the variation we are going to continue with. Some other lines can also transpose into our variation. And we will play knight to c6. So this is pretty standard. If you have seen the Sicilian before, this is almost always the starting position. There are other variations, but we won't talk about those in this video. Most of the time here, white will play pawn to d4, which makes a lot of sense. They take up the center, their knight is already protecting this, so is the queen, and this is a pretty good start from white. This is a bit universal, almost everybody plays this. Sometimes they can also delay this move, for example, play out the bishop first, but yeah. If they ever play this, we are just going to transpose into the same positions. And even as black, if they don't go for the specific setup, you can still try the IDs from the Sicilian dragon. So we are going to take this. Because we don't want white to get a really strong center, white is going to recapture. They will recapture with the knight, of course, because the queen will just be captured by our knight. So the knight has to capture. And then here, this is where we are going to play pawn to g6, which is very typical. Sicilian dragon basically means we are going to put our bishop here on the long diagonal. That is one of the key IDs. And here this is the accelerated dragon because we are going for it right away, while in the regular Sicilian dragon you wait a little bit longer and play some other moves first. But here we are just going to play g6 immediately. So from this point there are 3 variations which we are going to cover. And this first part we are going to cover knight to c3, which is online 44% of games. So yeah, a lot of games in this position. Then the second most played move is knight takes c6, which is a short variation, but we still have to cover it because it's a little bit different from the regular one. And then also, this is a bit more high level, is pawn to c4. This is known as the Maroczy bind. That's what we're going to cover at the end. Very interesting, very high level. I don't think you will see it a lot online, but it's a good opening. So knight to c3 first. We are of course going to play bishop to g7. And immediately it's pretty easy to remember this. Just play the setup, we attack the knight, and white has to make a choice. What are they going to do with this knight? Of course, white can always capture on c6, and usually capturing on c6 is not so good for white. If they want to do it, they practically have to do it on move 5 immediately, because if they wait just one move longer, for example here, it's already less strong. Because we can of course just recapture with the pawn. This pawn is also really useful because it's taking up 2 squares and it also might support a d5 push in the future. And after a couple of moves, the game is going to be pretty pleasant for black. It's important here that you don't make the mistake of moving your knight out. We're going to mark this as a mistake because otherwise they can just push the pawn, attack the knight. You are already losing your move. Where are you going to go? It's not so clear. Maybe here. Then they can attack you with g4, so we don't want that. So we want to prevent white from playing this. So you have to play queen to c7 so you can prevent this. And I just wanted to show you this because if I don't cover this line and somebody takes your knight, you're going to be in trouble. So we have to quickly check this out. For example, they castle, we can play knight to f6. And if they really try to force this pawn push, you can always play d6 as well. And now we just have 2 pieces here looking at this. For example, they can try still to play bishop to f4. Then we can play knight h5. The bishop has to go, we can castle. And pretty much we are in a good position. This is, of course, if they take your knight. They don't have to, but I wanted to show you what happens then so you don't run into trouble. Most of the time they will just defend their knight. And they can defend their knight with the bishop. There's not much else to do. They can also move the knight, but you won't see this a lot because usually we want to start a queenside attack anyways. And the knight is kind of, yeah, just a vulnerable target here for a queenside attack. So bishop to e3. We are going to continue knight to f6. Always be careful that you don't run into this quick e5 push by black, but of course here it doesn't work because we would just be capturing it with our knight. If this was already supported, you would probably have to play something like pawn to d6 first. Queen to c7 is not so good here because of course the knights can just go and attack her. You can play this, but you would have to play a6 as well. So knight to f6. White usually plays the bishop out. They can also do this move earlier. So as I said, other move orders often go into the same position. Sometimes you will also see players play the move f3. And f3 is a really common idea for white in these positions. Because with f3 they are really solidifying their center, but more importantly, they are also stopping us from playing a knight to g4. A knight to g4 attacking the bishop is a really good plan for black. But right now, of course, the plan doesn't work. We would just be giving away a knight for free. And that is why f3, it's a bit too early here to play f3. They don't have to play it. They can play it. You can get a position like this. You can strike back in the center with t5. If you want to learn more about this, there is a link in the top pinned comment where you can also analyze this Leech's study. So bishop to c4 is most played, and then we can castle. Of course, we're not going to jump in with the knight because, yeah, we would just be captured. So we're going to castle. And white can play multiple things. The most played move is bishop to b3, which you might think, why are you going to move the bishop twice? Why would you not just castle? Well, it's possible to castle as well, but this bishop probably has to move at some point anyways. So many of these lines from this point onwards are going to branch into different paths, but it's all pretty similar in the end. So let's take a look at bishop to b3, and we are going to play pawn to d6. And why do we play pawn to d6? First of all, of course, this helps prevent this e5 push, which might happen in the future, but also now we do have the potential to jump in with the knight and to attack this bishop. So basically, white has to play f3 at this point to make sure that this doesn't happen. If they just castle, which they can always do, you just have to remember this idea of attacking the bishop. And that's always what I try to do. I just try to explain you the ideas so you don't have to remember the specific lines. It's good to know that just trying to hunt down this bishop is one of the ideas. So it's possible, of course, you get this, you can attack the bishop. Yeah, of course, multiple lines are possible. They might always take here, it doesn't matter. Maybe they are going to move the bishop somewhere, but yeah, it's a fine position for black if you can get this. So they might play f3, which is the best move to try and prevent us. So we are going to continue with this. And now it's pretty easy, I think, to remember the rest of the moves for black, just because we don't have that many different options. If you look at this and I ask you what move are you going to play, well, our king side is already developed and fine. We already have the knights out, and the center we're not really going to do anything. Pushing e5 too early is never good because this would be a weak pawn, so we are not going to play that. So most likely we want to develop the bishop. And we don't have a lot of choice, so we are going to play bishop to c6 so that this is protected, and in the future we can also put the bishop on c6 by going from the d7 square to c6. White has a lot of options. White can always castle kingside, that's fine. If they have studied how to play against this, most of the time they will play something like queen to d2, and they will try to start an attack against our king, and they will even try to push their pawns in some variations and castle queenside. So there are two options really here for white. I think if white castles kingside, usually the game is pretty easy because, well, white doesn't really have anything spectacular going on, and as black, usually we are going to try and attack on the queen side, usually with a6, maybe b5, trying to go in with a knight somewhere as well, maybe knight to a5, hunting down this bishop as well. All of those ideas are very much possible here. They can also play queen to d2, and they can try to castle queenside, which is the more interesting variation to take a look at. So again, we look at this for black. What move are we going to play? So most of our pieces have been developed. We want to try and find the move. Well, I already told you, we actually want to develop the bishop. So a good variation here is to just go and exchange the knights. Why are we doing this right now? Well, you can see this. White is basically, if I just make a random move, white might, in some variations, try and play for a bishop to h6. And it kind of depends where. Of course, right here, this would not be a good move. This would be a blunder because, well, if we take this, and then the knight would be hanging. But you can imagine some future where, for example, after they have taken here and we recapture, they play bishop to h6. And then this is one of our strongest pieces. Now, of course, we are going to lose the piece. So that is what we are trying to do. This knight is a little bit of a liability, a little bit of a weakness. So if we can exchange this, we are forcing one of the pieces to move, either the queen or the bishop. Most of the time, of course, they are going to take with the bishop, because if they take with the queen, well, yeah, we have tricks all the way. We can move the knight, we can attack this. Yeah, it's just a big mess. So that is why I would say you can always take this knight pretty much on d4. And I would say the best thing is to wait, because they might capture you, and if they capture you, that's always fine. You're usually going to capture with the pawn, and we just get an extra pawn towards the center, which is always good. If they never capture you, the moment that you want to capture them is the moment they are threatening to do this. So that is why we are going to capture here. They are going to recapture, and now their attack here has been at least temporarily stopped. So again, it's black to move. What are we going to do? Well, now we can keep attacking on the queen side, which is the basic plan for black. We are going to attack on the queen side. And now you're going to see why this bishop here is a really useful piece. Here we don't have to put it on c6. There's not really any reason to. But here we are also supporting the b5 pawn push. White can still choose. White can still castle king side. White can still castle queen side. I always feel if they castle king side, it's kind of giving up their own plan. Because we can just keep pushing, we can attack the queen side all the way, and white doesn't really have a good plan. They're not going to start an attack with the king here. So yeah, most of the time, if they want to have a fighting game, they have to castle queen side, so that at least in the future they can still try to push. But you can already see that black is the one who is quicker here with the attack. White still hasn't even really started attacking us, and we are already attacking them. A good thing to remember is also that the b4, this early b4 push against this knight, usually is not such a good plan. And this is a mistake that I see very often. It's a move that's played a lot, and that is here pushing this pawn to b4, attacking this knight, because you're thinking, okay, I'm winning a move, I'm attacking the knight. But there's just a simple problem. Knight to d5, and you can see this is actually attacked twice. Yeah, it's not even defended. And also this is attacked twice. So if you want to defend your pawn, if you don't want to lose it, you just get takes, and yeah, we just have a bad structure. This pawn is weak, we are going to lose that pawn as well. So this is not a good variation. If we take the knight, which is also possible, they can take here, we can take this, they can take here, and then still this pawn is under attack. You might want to defend it, but then of course you would be losing the rook. If you want to defend it like this, there's even the queen check. I mean, now this is falling as well. It's pretty complicated, but this is not what you want to go for. So pushing b4 too early, never really a good plan. That's why we play pawn to a5. And still, one of the best moves for white is at one point to try and activate his knight. But now we don't really have any issues. Of course, we can take. If you push here, that's also possible. But you can see this is a check. We have to solve this. And then they can just move the bishop. Pretty much. So there's no point in trying to attack the bishop too quickly here. Sometimes you can also see variations where white will try to start an attack. They are a little bit impatient, they want to attack us. But most of the time you can just try and win the material here by pushing to a4. You can see this bishop barely has any squares. They basically have to go here. And then there's a cool trick here, you can play pawn to b4. So we are in a way sacrificing the rook. We can take here. This is of course under attack. If they move back, they are losing the queen. So if they take this, we are also taking the bishop. So it's an interesting trick you can play. And if they move the knight, we can just attack this bishop again. Taking this is not so good. If they move the bishop back, then we are going to take. And you can see black really won a lot of space. Just to show you, if white tries to be aggressive, you never have to panic and think about defending your position. You always have to think, how can I strike back? How can I attack white? So yeah, that is why you have to keep this in mind. So here we are just going to trade. We are going to get this trade, one big trade. We get a similar position as we have talked about. And we are going to try to attack the queen side. A lot of the times white is going to give you this check. It never really matters. You can play your king back. You can also play f6 in some variations. I think here it's best probably to move the king back, because otherwise we are also making things a little bit tricky for ourselves as well. So we're just going to move the king back. And then just one quick variation I'm going to show you a little bit more quickly, as you can get some pawn pushes like this, but in the end you are going to be able to advance on the queen side at some point. White will attack you on the king side. We can continue on the queen side. White's going to push. We can also go in with the queen. And you might get positions like this and think, oof, this is very scary. Like, this rook is already aiming down. They can put the rook here. They can double up. But usually it's always black. If you play this right, it's always black who is the fastest with the attack. So just one variation. There are other variations in the Lichess study as well, but just one variation here. We can just triple on the c file. A lot of pressure. White basically has to do everything to try and hang on to this. We can keep pushing the pawns and it's just losing for white. For example, a variation like pawn to b3, we can attack the queen has to go, and then we can go for a checkmate. If they play this, it's also losing because we can basically take. If they take, we can take here as well. I mean, yeah, it's just losing for white in every line. So this is just the basics of how to play the Sicilian accelerated dragon. If you remember this first part and at least the main IDs, you will be fine in pretty much most positions, but there still are two interesting ways white can try to fight back that we have to take a look at. So the first one, of course, is if we are in this position and we play g6, what if white just immediately captures? And that's why I'm telling you, white capturing is usually a bad thing for them, but if they capture immediately, there are some tricks that they have, which you have to know. So, of course, we have to recapture. I would say recapture with this. If you recapture with this pawn, you're always getting this position. It's not that this is losing, by the way. This is still fine. But I would rather play a game of chess still with my queen on the board like this. And the reason why this is more tricky is because the bishop has not yet been placed on g7. So, not the king, but the queen. If the queen goes to this square, yeah, the rook is under attack, and we can't play the bishop out, of course, because we would just be losing the bishop. So this is why this variation is the most tricky if white wants to capture the knight. So we have to know how to deal with this. Of course, we want to make sure we don't lose the rook, so we are going to play knight to f6, so we can at least try to block this queen. But white has pawn to e5, and we have to move the knight again. Okay, we have to move the knight. If we take a look at the squares, of course, knight to d5 is the most interesting one. And most of the time, white will continue the attack. If they play c4, doesn't really matter. We can just move the knight back. Actually, this is possible, or this is possible. It doesn't matter. The most aggressive variation for white is, of course, pawn to e6, which looks a little bit creepy, but it doesn't really do much. The reason why, of course, they play this is they are both attacking the rook. Also, this pawn, it looks very strong for white, but we can just play pawn to f6. Again, we are stopping the queen. They might be thinking, okay, I can take here with a check, no worries. I would recommend taking with the queen. Both moves are equal according to the engine, and grandmasters even usually take with their bishop. But I think the variation where you take with the queen is a little bit easier to play. So we can take with the queen. They can still try to put pressure on our position. It doesn't really matter anymore at this point. But still, if you play careless, you might still run into trouble. For example, a variation like this. And if you castle, you are often in trouble because, well, first of all, we don't have enough defenders here in this position. Let's say we go for this, and then of course we are also losing the rook at the end of that variation. So you always have to be careful here that you don't just go for bishop g7 and castles, because you are castling straight into the line of fire. So we have to solve this problem first. There are multiple things you can do. You can play something like queen g4, which basically forces the queen trade. The variation I would recommend is to play queen check. And this is annoying. I mean, they don't really want to move the king, so they are probably going to play the bishop out. And then you can play bishop to h6. And now it's like we have turned the tables around. All of a sudden, we are the ones attacking. We suddenly have three attackers here, and the king is still in the center. Okay, we are also still in the center, but suddenly it's white who is a little bit in trouble. And most of the time, they can, for example, take here. We can take this. And this also sets up a beautiful trick. You might also be thinking, why am I not going to capture this? Well, it's also possible, but this variation is a little bit better for black, and this also sets up a trick. And that is where I am going to end off, because of course, if they want to have the easiest possible game, the ending position here is actually something like this. And yeah, let's say they move the knight out, we can play this. And this is the ending position, and it's better for black. So that is if they just go for all of the trades. But they can also fall for your trap. And the trap is that they take the queen with the bishop. And now we can take here, but the trap is that we are attacking this pawn, and also their bishop is under attack. So they might play something like c3, but we can sack, then take the bishop, and suddenly we are up material. We can still castle in some variations if we want, so this is good for black. There is one more line we need to cover, which is the Maroczy bind, and the Maroczy bind is, yeah, it's a very strategic opening, but we don't have enough time to cover it in this video. So if you want to watch this, definitely subscribe, and my next video is going to be on the Maroczy bind.